One last message. Don't start your new life until you know. This is the distilled conclusion of Carl Jung's entire clinical career, drawn from decades of watching countless people destroy their own transformations by repeating the exact same psychological mistake, while he spent his life trying to understand why people who desperately want to change almost never truly do. And the strangest part about Jung is not his theory, it is what he actually went through to build it. After his split with Sigmund Freud, something broke open in him. He began experiencing visions. He heard inner voices. He walked the razor-thin edge between profound insight and full psychological breakdown for several years. He called it his confrontation with the unconscious, his descent into the underworld. He wrote thousands of pages of private notes and drawings in a book he refused to publish in his lifetime, a document so strange and personal that it was kept from the public for nearly a century. And when he finally came back from that descent, what he brought with him was not a motivational framework or a set of productivity habits. It was a map, a real, hard-earned, tested map for the second half of human life. And that map begins with one uncomfortable truth that most people never hear until it is already too late to ignore. You have been living a performance, not intentionally, not even fully consciously, but somewhere along the way, you built a version of yourself designed to please, to succeed, and to survive. And that version became so polished and so automatic that you forgot it was a performance. You started to believe it was who you actually are. And right now, as you try to start a new chapter, that same performance is quietly blocking you from doing what you actually came here to do. This is what Jung discovered. Most people who decide to start a new life make one fatal mistake before they even begin. They take the personality they spent years carefully assembling, and they dress it up in new circumstances. New city, new career, new relationship, new routine. Same unexamined psychological software running everything underneath. Same fears wearing different clothes. Same patterns expressing themselves through a new set of people and situations. And the painful part is that the person doing this usually cannot see it. They are convinced that this time it will be different because the circumstances are different. But Jung understood something that most of us resist knowing. The circumstances are not the source of the problem. We are. And until the inner world changes, the outer world will keep assembling itself in the familiar shape. Real transformation is not about changing your surroundings. It is about changing who you are at the level where your surroundings are created. And to do that, there is a specific, non-negotiable process you have to be willing to go through. Jung called it individuation, and most people skip almost every step of it, and then wonder why the new chapter feels suspiciously like the old one with a different backdrop. So let us go through the steps, because before you try to start a new life, there are 5 things you need to understand. These are not abstract philosophical ideas. They are practical psychological realities that will determine whether your attempt at transformation actually works, or whether it quietly dissolves back into what you have always known. The first thing is this: you are wearing a mask, and it is likely that you do not fully know it yet. Jung called this mask the persona. The word itself is the Latin term for the mask worn by Roman actors on stage, a tradition the Romans inherited from the earlier Greek theatrical world. And that etymology matters because it tells you everything about what the persona actually is. A persona is a role. It is a character being performed for an audience. And in your case, the audience is everyone you have ever needed something from: approval, security, love, belonging, success. The persona is not your enemy. Jung was very clear and very consistent about this. Every person needs a social face in order to function in the world. You cannot walk through life completely unguarded and expect to build anything sustainable. Think about the version of yourself you take to job interviews. The version that shows up at family gatherings where everyone has a fixed idea of who you are. The version that knows which words land well and which behaviors get results in the specific environments you move through every day. You learned these things early. You refined them over years. And you polished that presentation until it became automatic and effortless. The problem is not the mask. The problem is when you forget you are wearing one. And after enough years, after the persona has been your primary interface with the world for long enough, most people do exactly that. The mask gets so comfortable, so familiar, so deeply habitual, that it starts to feel like skin. And when someone tries to point out that the face they are seeing might not be the real one, the reaction is often resistance. Because you have been identified with this version of yourself for so long that questioning it feels like an attack on something essential. Consider a composite example based on carefully observed patterns in psychological literature. A man spends the first 30 years of his adult life building himself into the image of reliability and strength. He is decisive at work, never uncertain in meetings, always the one people turn to when something needs to be handled. He is steady for his family, calm in crises, emotionally contained. He never complains. He handles things. Everyone around him respects him deeply and instinctively. And then one evening, sitting alone in his house with nowhere to be and no one to perform for, he realizes with a quiet kind of shock that he has no idea who he actually is underneath all of that. The career is real. The family is real. The reputation is real. But the man inside, stripped of every role he has ever played, is almost a stranger to himself. He does not know what he enjoys, apart from what he performs enjoying. He does not know what he wants, apart from what he has always known he was supposed to want. This is the crisis Jung identified as one of the defining psychological challenges of midlife. And it happens quietly, without any dramatic announcement, in ordinary moments when the mask comes off and there is nobody clearly certain underneath it. Jung wrote in what became Volume 7 of his collected works, in the section concerning the persona as a segment of the collective psyche, that when a man identifies so completely with his social role that the role consumes the person entirely, underneath all the padding of that role, one would find a very pitiable little creature. That is the true cost of a persona that has been mistaken for the self, a life that looks like it belongs to someone real, but is actually a performance that forgot what the show was originally for. So what do you actually do about it? You do not fight the mask. You do not try to tear it off by force. Jung was explicit that attempts to violently separate yourself from the persona produce only cramp, not freedom. What you do instead is get curious. You start asking yourself, with real honesty, which parts of your thinking and behavior are genuinely yours, and which parts are habits of performance that became unconscious long ago. Because beneath that performance, Jung was absolutely certain, there is a real individual with their own depths and their own legitimate needs, and the only path to a life that truly feels like yours is to start finding out who that person actually is. That is where the mask begins to come down, and it leads directly into the second thing you must understand before you try to start a new life. The rules change, not gradually, not partially, they change completely. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The alchemist's path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. One of the most direct and important things Jung ever put into writing appears in his essay called The Stages of Life, which became part of Volume 8 of his collected works. He wrote that we cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning, because what was great in the morning will be little at evening, and what in the morning was true will at evening become a lie. He followed this by writing that he had given psychological treatment to too many people of advancing years, and looked too often into the secret chambers of their souls, not to be moved by this fundamental and inescapable truth. Read those words slowly, because they describe exactly what most people are attempting when they say they want a new life. They are running morning software in the afternoon, and they cannot understand why, despite all the external changes they are making, everything still feels fundamentally the same. The problem is not the effort. The problem is the operating system. The morning of life is built entirely for expansion. In your 20s and 30s, life asks you to push outward into the world. Build a career, build relationships, build an identity that the world can recognize and reward. Set goals and pursue them relentlessly. Accumulate, achieve, take up as much space as you can manage. Entire economies, educational systems, and cultural narratives exist to reward exactly this behavior. And for the first half of life, this orientation is not just acceptable, it is correct. It is what the morning is designed for. But then the afternoon arrives, and it is built for something completely different. It is built for depth rather than breadth, for meaning rather than accumulation, for inward exploration rather than outward conquest. And when you arrive in the afternoon of your life still running the morning program, something begins to feel wrong in a way that is very difficult to name. Goals that used to excite you start to feel strangely hollow. Achievements that you worked years for stop delivering the satisfaction that powered you toward them. You hit the target and feel empty. The ladder you have been climbing starts to feel like it might be leaning against the wrong wall entirely. And a question begins to surface that refuses to be quiet. Is this actually the life I wanted? Or is it the life I built because it was the version I knew how to build? Jung put this in one of the most precise images he ever used. Even the most beautiful flowers wilt. The things that gave life its direction and meaning in the first half do not automatically carry the same weight in the second. This is not failure. This is not depression, though it can look very much like it from the outside. This is your psyche doing exactly what it is supposed to do. It is telling you, with increasing volume, that the time for a different kind of growth has arrived. The morning of life is about building the ego, the outer self, the persona that faces the world and negotiates with it. The afternoon is about discovering what that ego was built on top of, and whether any of it was actually as important as it seemed at the time. And turning toward that inward territory takes a very different kind of courage than the kind required to push forward. Here is where most people make a catastrophic error. They feel the emptiness of the afternoon arriving and they panic. They assume the answer is more of what worked in the morning. A bigger goal, a more impressive achievement, a faster pace, a new relationship that might rekindle the old excitement. More noise, more stimulation, more of everything. But Jung compared this approach directly to trying to warm yourself over the ashes of a fire that has already finished burning. You cannot solve afternoon problems with morning tools. The toolkit must change along with the chapter. The afternoon of life asks you to turn around, to stop pushing outward and start moving inward. And when you do, the third thing you must face is waiting for you. It has been growing quietly in the dark while you were busy pushing outward. You have a shadow. And it is significantly more powerful than you have given it credit for. The shadow is Jung's most recognized concept and simultaneously his most misunderstood. So let us be absolutely clear about what it actually means. The shadow is not only your evil side. That is the oversimplification. What the shadow actually contains is two things at once. It holds the inferior and undeveloped parts of your character, the qualities that can tip into genuine moral conflict when left completely unexamined. But it also holds buried gold, positive qualities that went underground alongside the negative ones. Creativity deemed impractical, passion deemed irresponsible, strength deemed threatening. Jung wrote explicitly about this gold in the shadow. The point of facing it is not just to contain the darkness, but to reclaim everything that went underground with it. The shadow is everything you decided not to be during the process of building who you are. When you constructed your persona, you made conscious and unconscious editorial decisions, confident, not fearful, calm, not chaotic, generous, not selfish, disciplined, not scattered, strong, not vulnerable. And every quality that did not fit into the chosen image got pushed out of conscious awareness and into the psychological basement Jung called the unconscious, not destroyed, not eliminated, just hidden away in a place where you did not have to look at it directly or take responsibility for it. Here is the thing people consistently underestimate about the shadow. It does not die when you stop acknowledging it. It grows stronger, and it finds ways to express itself, whether you want it to or not. It shows up in the anger that arrives completely out of proportion to the situation that triggered it, the jealousy that appears without a rational cause, the self-sabotage that strikes precisely when life is beginning to go well. Consider a narrative illustration based on patterns widely documented in depth psychology. Imagine a person who has spent their entire adult life building their identity around being patient, selfless, and peaceful. They never make demands. They never raise their voice. They are the first person anyone calls for help and the last person to ask for anything in return. Their reputation is built on their endless patience and their ability to remain calm in situations that would unravel most people. But privately, every few months, something completely breaks through the surface. In moments of deep exhaustion or accumulated stress, a disproportionate explosion arrives. It shocks the people closest to them. It shocks the person themselves far more, because they have been nothing but generous. They have done nothing wrong. By any honest accounting, they can construct. And they genuinely cannot understand where this intensity comes from or why it keeps finding them. What is happening is one of the most consistent shadow patterns in all of depth psychology. Every ounce of unexpressed anger, every legitimate need that was quietly swallowed for the sake of keeping the peace, every moment of feeling overlooked or taken for granted, it accumulated pressure over months and years of consistent suppression. And pressure does not stay contained forever. It always finds a way out eventually. Always. It finds the weakest point and pushes through. And because the person has never claimed this anger as a genuine and legitimate part of themselves, when it arrives, it feels like something foreign and frightening, like something that does not belong to them, when in truth, it belongs to them completely. Jung argued consistently that every genuine insight into the shadow is a necessary step along the road of real transformation, which means you cannot skip this part. You cannot go around it. You have to look honestly at what you rejected about yourself. The fear you labeled as weakness, the anger you called dangerous, the ambition you called selfish, the need you called needy, the desire you called inappropriate. These are not your failures. They are enormous stores of psychological energy that you have been spending enormous effort to suppress. When you stop suppressing them and start genuinely integrating them into a full and honest picture of who you are, that energy becomes available to you in new and productive ways. That is when transformation stops being a concept you read about and starts being something you can actually feel changing inside your daily experience. Jung did not say looking at the shadow is comfortable. He described it as a genuine confrontation. And he also noted that people who refuse this confrontation tend to project their shadow outward onto others. They see in other people the anger they will not claim in themselves. The shadow denied does not disappear. It just moves outside and starts wearing other people's faces. This brings us directly to the fourth thing you must be willing to do, and this one is the hardest of all. You must allow the old version of yourself to die, not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech, as a real psychological event that takes real time, produces real grief, and creates a real and lasting opening on the other side of it. Jung was precise about this in a way that makes most people uncomfortable to hear. He described what genuine transformation requires using the language of sacrifice and metamorphosis, drawing on the symbolic imagery he explored in Symbols of Transformation. He talked about the necessary sacrifice of the ego's dominance, the willingness to let the old attitude be transformed rather than simply upgraded, not a shift, not a renovation, a genuine psychological metamorphosis in which the old orientation must be offered up so that something new can take its place. Because when you say you want a new life, you are asking for a new self, a new way of seeing yourself and the world. And a new self cannot emerge while the old self is still insisting on running the operation. The old defense systems, the old emotional reflexes, the old stories you have been telling yourself about who you are and why your life is the way it is, these things must be genuinely offered up, and offering them up requires grief. Jung identified certain emotional materials that he called lost contents. These are the psychological things that people consistently try to skip over when they attempt to move forward. The genuine grief of leaving behind an old identity that served you well for years. The fear of who you might become if you stop being who you have always known yourself to be. And Jung made a very serious and specific claim about what happens when you try to bypass these materials. They do not evaporate, they go underground, and from underground, they recreate the exact same psychological conditions as before, the same invisible ceiling, the same emotional patterns, the same inner limitations, new circumstances on the outside, identical architecture on the inside. To illustrate this, consider a case profile drawn from patterns observed consistently across depth psychological literature. A person in their mid-40s walks away from everything that defined their first chapter, a demanding career, a long-term relationship that stopped working, a social circle that felt hollow. They relocate somewhere entirely new and build what looks from the outside like a fresh beginning. But within 2 years, the same dynamics have reassembled themselves. They are overworking again, keeping people at a careful emotional distance again, fighting the same internal narrative that insists, no matter where they go, that they are not quite enough. The geography changed completely. The psychology did not move a single inch. This is what happens when transformation bypasses the grief. When the old self is not properly honored, acknowledged, and genuinely released, it simply relocates. It follows you across the country. It settles into your new apartment, your new workplace, your new relationships. It waits quietly in the corner of every fresh beginning you attempt, and the only thing that actually stops it is to face it, to sit with the real weight of what you are leaving behind, to feel what it costs, to let go of the person you spent decades building, and to say goodbye to the parts of yourself you have been carrying out of habit and fear rather than because they genuinely still belong to who you are growing into. Real grief takes time, and it cannot be rushed. It asks you to be present with discomfort that has no immediate solution and no satisfying answer. It cannot be abbreviated by journaling over a weekend, or resolved by talking about it once and moving on. It asks for your full attention and your honest presence. And inside that discomfort, if you are willing to stay present long enough, something genuinely shifts. Space opens up in your inner world that was not there before, and in that opening, the real work of becoming someone new can finally and properly begin. So now the mask is coming down. The new rules of the afternoon are being accepted. The shadow is being faced. The old self is being properly grieved. And we arrive at the fifth and most transformative understanding of all. What comes after all of that? What grows in the space you have cleared? Jung's answer was the calling, the vocation. He used the German word Bestimmung for this, which translates roughly as a sense of inner determination or calling, and he considered it one of the most important forces in the second half of human life. The process of following that calling consistently was what he called individuation. Individuation is not self-improvement. It is not optimization. It is not building a better performing version of the social self you have already spent decades constructing. It is the process of becoming fully and completely yourself, in a way that is unique to you and belongs to no one else. Jung described the ultimate goal of life as the realization of the self, not the ego, the self. The ego is the conscious, decision-making, goal-setting part of your mind. The self is everything. The conscious and the unconscious brought into relationship. The light and the shadow integrated. The known and the hidden in genuine communication with each other. Individuation is the movement toward that wholeness. Jung was explicit that genuinely following this path means accepting a real degree of separation from the pull of the crowd, not hostility toward others, not selfishness or withdrawal from life, but a genuine and growing independence of inner orientation that allows you to make choices based on the deep logic of your own soul, rather than on the constant need for approval from the people around you. This is deeply countercultural, especially in a world that measures worth through social validation. We are trained from childhood to read the room, to understand what the group expects, and to shape ourselves accordingly. Individuation asks you to begin doing something different, quietly, firmly, and persistently. To start taking yourself seriously as a specific individual rather than as a role in someone else's story. The way this vocation communicates with you is through what Jung sometimes called the daimon, borrowing from the ancient Greek concept of an inner guiding spirit. Not a literal voice in most cases. More often a feeling, a persistent and returning sense of what matters and what does not. An intuition that refuses to be permanently silenced. Most people spend the entire first half of their lives learning to drown this signal out, because it does not always agree with the persona, and it does not always support the ego's established plans. And so it gets pushed down, exactly like the shadow, into the quieter layers of the unconscious. And yet it keeps returning. That is the thing about the vocation that Jung understood so clearly. It is not deterred by being ignored. It is patient in a way the ego cannot match. It will wait years. It will wait decades. It speaks through boredom, through inexplicable sadness in circumstances that should feel fine, through the strange restlessness that arrives when everything in your life looks right from the outside. It speaks through the gap between what you achieve and what you feel, and it is always pointing toward the same destination, yourself, the real version, the one underneath all the performance. But in the second half of life, this signal gets steadily louder, and if you keep overriding it, it begins to speak in the language of symptoms, a chronic dissatisfaction that no achievement manages to touch, a restlessness that follows you even into moments that should feel genuinely good, a growing sense that your life, however impressive it looks to others, belongs to someone else. These are not signs of failure. They are messages from the deeper self. And learning to take them seriously, to bring them into conscious awareness and engage with them honestly, is the entire point of everything Jung was trying to map. Jung was emphatic that this is not a journey anyone can make for you. A therapist can walk alongside. A trusted friend can hold the space. But the actual work of going inward, of integrating the shadow and following the vocation that belongs uniquely to you, that work is yours alone. No one else can do it. And that is not a limitation. That is the whole point, because the destination is a self that is irreducibly and completely your own. All of this, The mask coming down, the afternoon rules being accepted, the shadow being faced, the old self being released, the vocation finally being heard, all of it flows into what Jung called the transcendent function. And this is the precise mechanism through which genuine transformation becomes psychologically possible. Jung first described the transcendent function in a manuscript he wrote in 1916. He was careful to point out that there is nothing mystical about the term. He defined it as a psychological function that arises from the union of conscious and unconscious contents. It is the mediating process, the bridge builder between the ego and the deeper self. Crucially, the transcendent function does not produce a better version of your old self. It produces what he called a third thing, a new synthetic attitude that did not exist before. It is not the destination of transformation. It is the mechanism that makes the journey between who you were and who you are becoming a psychologically navigable one. It is what happens when your thinking, aware mind and your deeper, hidden self begin to work together, rather than against each other. Jung described this as building a bridge across the gulf between the conscious and the unconscious, and it is on that bridge that a truer version of who you are finally begins to emerge. Not a version constructed by the ego to satisfy others, one that arises from the full depth of who you actually are. But building the bridge takes time and requires holding tension. You must stand in the uncomfortable space between who you have been and who you are becoming, without collapsing the distance prematurely in either direction. The transcendent function asks for patience, for willingness to remain present while something new forms in its own time. Think of a person who has spent 2 decades in a profession that no longer calls to them. They feel something different beginning to ask for their attention, persistently and unmistakably. They cannot fully name it yet, but it returns every single time they stop moving fast enough to ignore it. The transcendent function is exactly what is happening in that liminal space. The inner life is reorganizing itself quietly and without fanfare. Buried experiences are connecting to present longings in new configurations. A different way of being is slowly assembling itself from the raw material of an entire life lived. And if the person can resist the panic of not yet having the answer, if they can remain present and honest during that uncomfortable in-between period, what eventually emerges is not invented by willpower.